Deep in the mist-shrouded foothills of the Pyrenees, a decaying town hides a cursed secret. In 1883, an unsuspecting English archaeologist, Dennistoun, arrives to study the ancient cathedral of St. Bertrand de Comminges. But within its crumbling walls, he uncovers a nightmare, a grotesque drawing, a book bound in darkness, and a creature that should not exist. As the shadows close in and the line between the living and the damned fades, Dennistoun learns the hard way. Some evils are better left buried. This is the bone-chilling tale of Canon Alberic's scrapbook, a descent into terror, where the past claws its way into the present, and no one escapes unharmed. St. Bertrand de Comminges wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis. Tucked away in the foothills of the Pyrenees, it was more of a forgotten relic than a town. Its population barely scratched 1,000, and its only claim to fame was an ancient cathedral that drew the occasional tourist. In the spring of 1883, an Englishman named Dennistoun arrived there, fresh out of Cambridge and armed with a notebook, a camera, and an unshakable passion for archaeology. He'd left 2 less enthusiastic friends back at their hotel in Toulouse, promising to meet up the next day. For now, he had the cathedral all to himself, or so he thought. Dennistoun had big plans. He intended to document every inch of the cathedral, from its crumbling organ to its faded tapestries. To pull it off, he needed the help of the sacristan, the church's caretaker. The innkeeper of the Chapeau Rouge, a no-nonsense woman, had summoned the old man, and when he arrived, Dennistoun was struck by how off he seemed. The sacristan was a wiry, nervous little man, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to grab him. His hunched shoulders and twitchy movements gave him the air of a man haunted. Dennistoun couldn't decide if the guy was paranoid, guilty, or just terrified of his wife. Either way, it was unsettling. But Dennistoun had work to do. He buried himself in his notes and camera, only occasionally glancing at the sacristan, who hovered nearby like a shadow. The old man seemed to be everywhere at once, huddled against a wall, crouching in a pew, or darting his eyes around the cavernous space. Dennistoun started to feel uneasy. Was he keeping the sacristan from lunch? Did the guy think he was going to steal something? The tension was palpable. "You can go home if you want," Dennistoun offered, trying to sound casual. "I'll be fine on my own. You can even lock me in. I'll need a couple more hours." The sacristan's reaction was immediate and intense. "No, no, monsieur. Absolutely not," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I cannot leave you here. 2 hours, 3 hours, it makes no difference. I am not cold, and I have already eaten." "Thank you, monsieur." Dennistoun raised an eyebrow, but didn't press the issue. "Suit yourself," he muttered under his breath. "But don't say I didn't warn you." As the hours dragged on, Dennistoun explored every corner of the cathedral. The stalls, the organ, the choir screen. It was all meticulously documented. But the sacristan's behavior grew stranger. Every creak, every distant echo made him jump like he'd been stung. At one point, Dennistoun swore he heard a faint, metallic laugh echoing from the tower. He shot a questioning look at the sacristan, who had gone deathly pale. It's nothing," the old man whispered, his voice barely audible. "The door is locked. No one is there." Dennistoun didn't buy it. Something was very wrong. Later, while examining a dark, almost indecipherable painting behind the altar, Dennistoun noticed the sacristan drop to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The painting depicted Saint Bertrand saving a man from the devil, and the Latin inscription below hinted at a grim story. Dennisdown pretended not to notice, but the question gnawed at him. What could possibly make a man react like that? By late afternoon, the shadows in the cathedral grew longer, and the strange noises, distant footsteps, muffled voices, seemed to grow louder. The sacristan became increasingly agitated, clearly eager to leave. When Dennisdown finally packed up his things, the old man practically dragged him to the western door. As they stepped outside, the sacristan hurried to ring the Angelus bell. The deep, resonant toll of the bell echoed through the valley, a solemn call to prayer. For a moment, the town fell into an eerie silence. Dennisdown took a deep breath, relieved to be out of the oppressive atmosphere of the cathedral. But as they walked away, the sacristan leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. "Monsieur, you must leave tonight. Do not stay here after dark. There are things in this town that are best left undisturbed." Dennisdown frowned. "What are you talking about?" The sacristan's eyes darted toward the cathedral tower. "You heard the laughter, didn't you? That was no echo. And the painting, you saw it. St. Bertrand's miracle wasn't just a story. It was a warning." Before Dennisdown could respond, the old man turned and hurried away, leaving him standing alone in the gathering dusk. As the first stars appeared in the sky, a cold wind swept through the town, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, coming from the cathedral tower. Dennisdown stood frozen, his heart pounding. The laughter grew louder, more distinct, and this time it wasn't just in his head. Something was in the tower, something that shouldn't be there. As he stared up at the dark silhouette of the cathedral, a single thought crossed his mind. What have I gotten myself into? As Dennisdown and the sacristan stepped out of the cathedral, the old man hesitated, then struck up a conversation. Monsieur seemed interested in the old choir books in the sacristy, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Dennisdown nodded. "Ellis, do you know if there's a library in town? Somewhere with more manuscripts?" The sacristan shook his head. "No, monsieur. There used to be one belonging to the chapter, but now, well, this is such a small place." He paused, as if wrestling with himself, then blurted out, "But if monsieur is a lover of old books, I have something at home that might interest him. It's not far, just 100 yards. Dennisdown's heart leapt. Could this be the discovery he dreamed of? A priceless manuscript hidden in this forgotten town? But then reality set in. More likely, it was some worthless relic, a dusty missal or prayer book. Still, he couldn't pass up the chance. "Lead the way," he said. As they walked, Dennisdown couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sacristan's nervous energy was contagious. Was he walking into a trap? To test the waters, Dennisdown casually mentioned, "My two friends will be joining me tomorrow morning. We'll be traveling together." The sacristan's reaction was immediate. "That's good," he said, visibly relieved. "Very good. It's always better to travel in company, sometimes." The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. They soon arrived at a stone house, larger than its neighbors, with a weathered shield carved above the door. The upper windows were boarded up, giving the place an air of abandonment. The sacristan hesitated on the doorstep. "Perhaps monsieur doesn't have the time?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "Not at all," Dennisdown replied. "I've got nothing to do until tomorrow. Let's see what you've got." The door opened, revealing a young woman, the sacristan's daughter. She was strikingly beautiful, but her face bore the same haunted expression as her father's. Her eyes darted to Dennisdown, and for a moment, She seemed to brighten, but then her father whispered something to her. Dennisdown caught the words. He was laughing in the church, and her face paled. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and smoke. The sitting room was small, with a stone floor and a roaring fire in the hearth. A massive crucifix dominated one wall, its painted figure lifelike and unsettling. Beneath it stood an ancient chest. The sacristan approached it with trembling hands and pulled out a large book wrapped in a white cloth embroidered with a crude red cross. Even before the cloth was removed, Dennisdown's curiosity was piqued. The book was too large to be a missal, too oddly shaped for an anaphoner. When the sacristan finally unwrapped it, Dennisdown's breath caught in his throat. It was a folio, bound in the late 17th century, stamped with the arms of Canon Alberic de Comminges. Inside were pages of illuminated manuscripts, some of the finest Dennisdown had ever seen. There were leaves from a Genesis manuscript dating back to 700 AD, a complete set of illustrations from a 13th century English psalter, and, most astonishingly, fragments of an unknown patristic treatise in uncial script. Dennisdown's mind raced. This was no ordinary book. It was a treasure trove of lost history. He had to have it, no matter the cost. But as he glanced up at the sacristan, he noticed the man's face had gone pale, his lips trembling. "If monsieur will turn to the end," the sacristan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dennisdown did as he was told, flipping through the pages until he reached the final sheets. They were more recent, clearly added by Canon Alberic himself. The first sheet contained a detailed plan of St. Bertrand's south aisle and cloisters, marked with strange symbols and Hebrew words. In the corner was a Latin inscription, Asterisk Responsa, 12 miles, December 1694. Interrogatum est. Invenium? Responsum est. Invenis. Fiamna dives. Fees. Vivomni invidendis. Vives. Moriarn and lecto mio. Ida. Asterisk. Answers of the 12th of December, 1694. It was asked, shall I find it? Answer, thou shalt. Shall I become rich? Thou wilt. Shall I live an object of envy? Thou wilt. Shall I die in my bed? Thou wilt. Dennisdown chuckled. A treasure hunter's record, he muttered. But his amusement faded as he turned to the next page. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. That it was a sepia drawing, a scene from what appeared to be the Bible. On the right sat King Solomon on his throne, his face a mask of horror and disgust. Before him, four soldiers surrounded a crouching figure, while a fifth lay dead on the ground, his neck twisted unnaturally. But it was the crouching figure that held Dennisdown's gaze. At first, it was just a mass of matted black hair. Then he saw the emaciated body, the skeletal frame with muscles like wires, the clawed hands, and the burning yellow eyes fixed on the king with pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the most terrifying thing Dennisdown had ever seen. The figure wasn't human. It was something else, something monstrous. And yet, it felt alive, as if the artist had drawn it from life. Dennisdown looked up at the sacristan, his voice trembling. What is this? The sacristan's face was ashen. Monsieur, he whispered, you must leave. Take the book if you wish, but go, and never return. As Dennisdown stared at the drawing, the fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The room grew colder, and from somewhere deep within the house, he heard it, a faint, metallic laugh, just like the one he'd heard in the cathedral. The sacristan's daughter let out a choked sob. and the old man clutched his crucifix, muttering a prayer under his breath. Dennis Down's heart pounded. He had the book, but now he wasn't sure he wanted it. Something was in this house, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the faint rustle of the sacristan's daughter's rosary beads. Dennis Down, still reeling from the shock of the drawing, stole a glance at his hosts. The sacristan had his hands pressed over his eyes, muttering prayers under his breath, while his daughter stared fixedly at the crucifix on the wall, her lips moving rapidly as she counted her beads. Finally, Dennis Down broke the silence. "Is this book for sale?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The sacristan hesitated, then nodded. "If monsieur pleases. How much do you want for it?" 250 francs. Dennis Down blinked. The book was worth far more. Thousands, perhaps. His collector's conscience twinged. "My good man," he said, "this book is worth much more than that. I can't possibly take it for such a low price." But the sacristan was firm. 250 francs. Not more. Dennis Down couldn't argue. He handed over the money, signed a receipt, and even shared a glass of wine to seal the deal. As soon as the transaction was complete, the sacristan seemed to transform. He stood taller, his nervous glances ceased, and he even attempted a laugh. Dennis Down, eager to examine his new treasure, rose to leave. "Let me accompany you to your hotel," the sacristan offered. No, Dennis Down replied. "It's just a short walk, and there's a moon. I'll be fine." The sacristan insisted a few more times, but Dennis Down refused. "Just stay in the middle of the road," the old man finally said. "The sides are rough." Dennis Down nodded, clutching the book under his arm. As he stepped into the hallway, the sacristan's daughter approached him. She held out a silver crucifix on a chain. "For you, monsieur," she said. "Please take it." Dennis Down hesitated. "I couldn't possibly." No, she insisted. "It's a gift. You've been so kind." Her tone was so genuine that Dennis Down couldn't refuse. He thanked her profusely and allowed her to place the chain around his neck. As he walked back to the Chapeau Rouge, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd done something far more significant than buy a book. The sacristan and his daughter stood in the doorway, watching him until he disappeared into the night. Back at the inn, Dennis Down was eager to examine his prize. The landlady, however, seemed unusually interested in his visit to the sacristan. As Dennis Down passed the dining room, he overheard her speaking to someone, likely the sacristan, in hushed tones. "Pierre and Bertrand will be sleeping in the house tonight," she said, her voice tense. Dennis Down shrugged it off and retreated to his room. But as he sat at the table, the book opened before him. A growing sense of unease settled over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was behind him. He moved his chair so his back was to the wall, but the discomfort only deepened. "Bless Canon Alberic," he muttered to himself, trying to lighten the mood. "I wonder where he is now. Probably haunting some other poor soul." He chuckled nervously, then glanced at the crucifix around his neck. "This thing is heavier than it looks. Maybe I'll clean it up before I put it away." As he reached to remove the crucifix, something on the table caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a pen wiper, then a rat, then, God forbid, a spider. But as his eyes focused, his blood ran cold. It was a hand, not a human hand, but something far worse. The skin was pale and dusky, stretched tightly over bones and tendons of unnatural strength. Coarse black hair sprouted from it, and the nails were long, curved, and gray, like the claws of a beast. Dennisdown's mind flashed back to the drawing in the book, the crouching figure with the burning yellow eyes. Before he could react, the shape behind him rose to its full height. Tattered black drapery hung from its emaciated frame, and its coarse hair seemed to writhe like living tendrils. Its jaw was shallow, like an animal's, and its lips pulled back to reveal jagged teeth. But the eyes, those burning yellow eyes with black, hate-filled pupils, were the worst. They gleamed with an intelligence that was neither human nor beast, but something far more sinister. Dennisdown's scream tore through the night. He grabbed the silver crucifix and thrust it toward the creature, but it was already moving toward him. The last thing he remembered was the sound of his own voice, raw and animalistic, as he collapsed into unconsciousness. When he came to, Pierre and Bertrand, the inn's burly serving men, were standing over him. They had heard his scream and rushed in, but they saw nothing, only felt something push past them as they entered the room. Dennisdown was pale and shaking, but alive. His friends arrived the next morning, and though they were skeptical at first, the drawing in the book and the sacristan's haunted demeanor convinced them that something terrible had happened. But as Dennisdown packed his belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't gone. It was still out there, waiting, and the book, the cursed book, was still in his possession. As Dennisdown and his friends prepared to leave St. Bertrand, the sacristan appeared at the door of the inn. His face was ashen, and his hands trembled as he held out a small, wrapped package. "Take this," he said. "It may protect you. But know this, the creature is bound to the book. It will follow you. It will never stop." Dennisdown stared at the package, his heart pounding. What new horror awaited him? And how far would the creature go to reclaim what was its own? This, as dawn approached, the sacristan arrived at the Chapeau Rouge Inn, his face pale and drawn. He listened intently as the landlady recounted the events of the previous night. Dennisdown's scream, the serving men finding him unconscious, and the strange feeling of something unseen passing between them. The sacristan showed no surprise. Instead, he nodded solemnly and said, "It is he. It is he. I have seen him myself." When pressed for details, the sacristan remained cryptic. "Twice I have seen him. 1,000 times I have felt him," he murmured. He refused to explain the origins of the book or share his own experiences. "I will soon sleep, and my rest will be sweet," he said. "Why trouble me with questions?" That summer, the sacristan passed away. His daughter married and moved to St. Paul, leaving the mysteries of her father's life and his obsession behind. She never fully understood what had haunted him, and the truth died with him. The back of the terrifying drawing held a clue, written in Latin. Contradictio Salomonis cum demonio nocturno, Albericus de malione delinivit, asterisk v, Deus in adiutorium, P.S. cohabitat, asterisk, Saint Bertrand, demoniorum effugator, intercede pro me miserimo, asterisk primum vidi noc 12, me, December 1694, Uedibo mox ultimum, peccae et passus sum, plura ad hoc passuris, December 29th, 1701, asterisk. Translated, it read, asterisk the dispute of Solomon with the demon of the night, drawn by Alberic de Comminges, asterisk, asterisk versicle, O Lord, make haste to help me. Psalm, whoso dwelleth, Psalm 91, that asterisk. Saint Bertrand, who puttiest devils to flight, pray for me, most unhappy. Asterisk I saw it first on the night of December 12th, 1694. Soon I shall see it for the last time. I have sinned and suffered, and have more to suffer yet. December 29th, 1701, asterisk. Canon Alberic de Comminges had died on December 31st, 1701, reportedly of a sudden seizure. The details of his death, like the details of his life, were shrouded in mystery. But the drawing and the creature it depicted remained. Years later, Dennisdown reflected on the events with a mix of awe and unease. He often quoted a passage from Ecclesiasticus. Some spirits there be that are created for vengeance, and in their fury lay on sore strokes. On another occasion, he mused, Isaiah was a very sensible man. Doesn't he say something about night monsters living in the ruins of Babylon? These things are rather beyond us at present. But one confession stood out. During a visit to Comminges to see Canon Alberic's tomb, Dennisdown spoke at length with the vicar of St. Bertrand's. As they drove away, he turned to his companion and said, I hope it isn't wrong. You know I'm a Presbyterian, but I believe there will be saying of Mass and singing of dirges for Alberic de Comminges' rest. Then, with a touch of dry humor, he added, I had no notion they came so dear. The creature, bound to the book, had claimed its victims across centuries. Canon Alberic, the sacristan, and perhaps countless others. Dennisdown had survived, but the experience left him forever changed. The book, now locked away in a Cambridge library, remained a silent testament to the horrors it contained. And somewhere, in the shadows, the creature waited, patient, relentless, and hungry.